Greetings, I'm Dike Rostant. Welcome back to the TTT News. We are very happy to be joined by clinical psychologist Patricia Roberts. She is the lead for the Developmental Assessment Intervention Unit at the Ministry of Education. So it is time to go in depth with me, Dike Rostant. Welcome, Ms. Roberts. How are you doing?
I am good, thank you. You?
I am all right, thank you. And let me also wish you season's greetings. We are still inside. Lewa has not passed us yet. But I want to start off asking about the mandate of Daiu, the Developmental Assessment and Intervention Unit, please.
Well, like the rest of the ministry, our primary mandate is to build human capacity towards sustainable national development. And so what that means is creating equity and providing access to quality education for all students. But all students are obviously not the same. So what the Daiu does is through our assessment and our interventions, we try to identify and reduce the barriers to access to education so that the most vulnerable students can continue to be included in the education system, and that phrase, "no child left behind," becomes true.
And that is really an admirable goal. But with regard to the unit, though, and in pursuit of that goal, who makes up the unit? Is it only psychologists, clinical psychologists? Who are members of the team? What kind of capacities do they bring to the table?
We actually have three disciplines within the unit. There's actually the behavioral specialists who focus on externalizing or extreme behavioral challenges. We have the clinical psychologists like myself, and we look at developmental delays and significant mental health challenges. And then we have the school psychologists, and they are the ones who really focus on learning and barriers to learning and helping students with their academic functioning.
And thinking of individual like a school psychologist, is it harder now to say, okay, well, there's something I want to pursue with this child? How is it that referrals take place? And I'm thinking generally one, and then two, during this period of time where learning has been so much more remote.
Well, actually, the Daiu, in addition to the Student Support Services Division, we have sent out a lot of media information regarding how to contact us by email. We've set up hotlines, we have phone contacts, and so we actually take virtual referrals now. You can contact the Daiu directly by email, and what we do is we would take the information and we would fill out a virtual referral form, and we would take it to our multidisciplinary team meetings within the districts, and then we decide upon the best course forward in terms of who would manage the case. So the referrals actually have not slowed down. We take referrals from parents, we take self-referrals, and we still take teacher referrals.
And when you say self-referrals, who is it referring themselves?
The students, we take referrals directly from students. If a student identifies that they have a challenge or they feel like they need help or support, before when it was in person, they can go directly to the guidance officer who is stationed in the school, or they can fill out a referral form and submit it to SSSD via their teacher.
And with that in mind, what are some of those criteria that would, or the checkboxes that need to be filled for an intervention to take place or referral to happen?
You mean for Daiu or in general?
Oh, for Daiu, thank you.
Okay, for Daiu in particular, we function at what we refer to as the Tier 3 level, which is moderate to severe presenting problems. So typically, we would not see a student until they would have been given some sort of support or intervention from one of the other units in SSSD, like special ed or social worker guidance. And only after those challenges persist or the student doesn't respond to one of their interventions, then those units would refer them to Daiu for more specialized intervention. So it takes a few steps.
And inside of those steps, where does the teacher come in? Because yes, you spoke about school psychologists, but in terms of a teacher being interacting, being the one who engages with and interacts with that child? Is it a matter of building capacity so the teacher, the educator says, there is an issue here that I think I need to refer, or is it a matter of, it can't be that this child is wild, I need help? So what goes on in that process?
The teacher is involved in every step of the process, and we actually work extensively and collaboratively with Teacher Education, Performance, and Professional Development Division, which is responsible for the training of incoming and in-service teachers, the Daiu, along with SSSD. We have facilitated many workshops which help teachers identify students with special needs. We focus on anxiety, trauma, specific learning disabilities, so different types of presentations that a teacher might encounter in the classroom, and we help them to figure out how to word the referral form so that it's most effective, which is what we call the pre-referral process. And we also give them skills to start that tier 1 intervention, which is the initial intervention where the problem is first identified. So it's not necessarily every time that as soon as a problem is identified, the child needs to be referred. Work needs to be done in the classroom before it is referred to SSSD, and we work with teachers to help support them through all of that.
And in that support, is there customized support that you found that you've had to give out a little more generally now during the period of the pandemic? Because the situation would be very different than it was in face-to-face.
Yes. Many teachers and parents and students are struggling with this transition to online learning, and we have had to change our strategies, even our types of interventions and how we provide support has had to be altered because there's not as much in-person access. And so, yes, we have done numerous sessions talking about strategies for helping students to self-regulate and how to help them stay focused and how to manage, even how to identify online resources and provide stimulus materials for students just to keep them engaged. So yes, we've had to tailor our interventions and our support quite a lot.
Makes me wonder though, how, yes, there's been a period of transition for people who are used to that face-to-face school in the public school system. What about individuals who from jump the pandemic has been making a little less of a dent because they've been homeschooled? Does your catchment area provide access to people in that category?
Of course, we service all school-age students, So a parent who might identify that their child is having an issue, even though they're homeschooled, they have the same access to our services and they can do a parent referral the same way as everybody else. And we go through the same process of being reviewed by the MDT and support will be provided.
Oh, that's really nice to know. I want you to take me through the process now, though. So, caregiver, parent, educator, I think there's an issue that I can't necessarily deal with. How does it go from just me having that thought to contacting the DAIU and some sort of action taking place from the unit? I'm not necessarily asking you to wave a magic wand and fix my child, because I can imagine that request may happen as well sometimes. But what are the incremental steps taking us through that process?
So the first step is to, of course, find out information, find out how to contact us, whether it be SSSD on the whole, the different units, or ourselves directly, which is the DIU. We have our own email address, as I mentioned before, and it simply means reaching out. You can send an email saying what you think is happening. So what we try to help parents and teachers do in particular is to describe the problem. So often we have parents and teachers who say, my child might have ADHD or my child might have autism. So we try to discourage them from pre-diagnosing, and we try to encourage them to describe what it is they are observing the child struggling with. So I am noticing that my child is having trouble reading. They reverse letters, they read really slowly, they pick up words. Or I find my child takes a long time to learn math concepts. They struggle with their math grades are low. And so with that type of information, we can then begin to decide, okay, so this is an academic problem, and maybe they just have a motivational problem, or maybe they have a social emotional problem. And so that will help us to decide whether we ask social work to intervene, special ed to do their first intervention, or guidance to do the intervention. Once that's decided, one of those officers will reach out to the person, whether it be the parent or the teacher or the student directly, and they will begin to do an interview and an investigation. They will do their own levels of assessment, and then they will begin to do their own interventions. Should those interventions not be successful, they will then forward the case, to Daiu, because they would realize, okay, this child maybe needs something a little bit more specialized, a little bit more in depth, a little bit more detailed. And so the Daiu would come in and we would do a comprehensive assessment where we would try to identify the student's unique pattern of strengths and weaknesses. And based on those strengths and weaknesses, we try to tailor the intervention so they're very specific to the student's needs.
And Ms. Roberts, that's the classiest, most gracious version of please allow the professionals to do their job that I've ever heard. But we continue the conversation when we return. We're speaking with Patricia Roberts, clinical psychologist and lead of the Developmental Assessment Intervention Unit at the Ministry of Education. Stay with us. We return with more. Welcome back. We are speaking to the work of the DAIU, the Developmental Assessment and Intervention Unit, with lead at the unit, clinical psychologist Patricia Roberts. Thank you so much for staying with us. Now, Ms. Roberts, being diagnosed with a disability or having a child that is diagnosed with a disability can be an earth-shattering experience for some. How do you treat with a caregiver, the person in charge, who is responsible for that child when they get a diagnosis like that?
Well, the first thing we try to do is an extensive feedback session, which is where we would sit with the parent and go through the report and our findings in detail, explaining as much as we can and giving them the opportunity to ask as many questions as they can think of, because we know that clarity and knowledge is power. And subsequent to that, we would either do referrals if there is a need for other specialized intervention. And we also have programs within student support services like the parenting and education that social work does to help support parents as they continue their journey to support their child.
And I know you said school age, there's support for all school age children. What does that mean? Is there a cutoff age? Is there, what are those limits?
There's not really a cutoff age per se, but we are student support service division. So we only work with school age students from ECC all the way up to university. And we are equipped with tools to assess students of all ages. So, there isn't really a cutoff age. And
so, but from there, there's the diagnosis. How do parents continue engaging to get more resources, tools in their toolkit to be able to navigate this new path or journey ahead of them?
So we actually provide them with a list of resources where possible. And there are also a lot of non-governmental organizations out there like Autistic Society, ADHD Foundation, Moms for Literacy. So we try to introduce them to as many of these resources as possible. We also do case consultations, which is where we would develop an individualized education plan for the student, and that helps us to monitor the implementation of the interventions and track the progress of the student. And so the parent is engaged in an ongoing, ongoing, because we have to continue to see if our interventions make sense and if it works, and the intervention needs to be consistent across the home and the school settings.
And I'm very glad you said that, because it made me wonder whether or not the assessment is a one-time thing, or you have, okay, well, we did it today and we're going to have another one 6 months down the road. What is that like?
Well, actually, the assessment is the beginning of the process. It's actually start of a whole new set of work. And so what we try to do is, in the least, we try to assess 3 years from the date of the current report. But ideally, what we would want to do is like I said, continue to monitor the implementation and the success of the interventions, because we want to see if what we recommended makes sense. And the idea is to move the student from point A to point B. So we want to be able to track that progress. So it's not a one-off thing at all. It's the beginning of the process. And we want to see that once we've made the recommendations, something is happening after that. Otherwise, it's not going to be effective.
And I'm really glad you speak to data driving further actions. It's almost as though you're operating from a point of praxis. And with that in mind, though, what are some of those things that are most prevalent in terms of when you do your assessments? Now, I'm not asking to get into anybody's business, but some things it seems as though they may go beneath the radar, especially when you have people who are not doing that Google search and Google Scholar to say, okay, well, I'm going to say that the child has this or the child has that. But during your assessments, what are some of those things that you find commonly recurring?
Really, we're noticing children having a lot of challenges with their fine motor skills. So, a long time we used to play with clay and plasticine and all these things that used to strengthen your fingers. And what we're noticing is that a lot of children have poor, what we call graphomotor skills. So that ability to hold, grip the pencil, write quickly, write fluently, write legibly. And that can manifest itself in a lot of different ways. So you may have a student who's really poor at essay writing, and you think it's because they don't have a creative capacity. But if you let them say what they want to write, they have all these ideas, but when you put pen to paper, they're moving really slowly. And the other thing we're noticing is that a lot of students have a slow processing speed. So the rate at which they're learning, the rate at which they're making sense of information, and the rate at which they can respond to questions is lower than what we expect for their age. So those are two of the major areas that we see challenges in right now.
Now, you spoke to that first one, and it make me feel I have some people to get assessed. But how does that take place, Ms. Roberts, in terms of, is there website, phone number, email? How do we engage the services of the unit?
Well, you can email us at daiu@moe.gov.tt, or you can contact us at 622-2181 extension 1052.
And looking forward to parents who are going to engage the unit to say, okay, well, to help avail themselves of your services, what is the one thing or the two things that you really want them to have in mind while they are traversing this journey of uncertainty before they actually have an assessment done for their charge?
That is an excellent question. The two things, I would say two things. The first one being, get your ducks in a row. So a lot of parents, you need to have your data and your documentation in order so that when you come to the assessment, it's easy to get the information that we need to help figure out what's going on with the child and understand that it's not a quick fix. Getting an assessment done does not mean that the problems disappear spontaneously. It's a process, and subsequent to the assessment is where a lot of effort needs to be put into place for things to move forward. The second thing I'd really like to say to parents and caregivers is, it may seem selfish, but self-care is probably the most important thing you can do for your child. Healthy parents raise healthier children. If you are tired, if you are stressed, if you are irritable, if you are ill, your capacity, your ability to care for your child is diminished. And so you are not able to do what is necessary to parent. So all children need parents who are strong, who are healthy, and so therefore taking care of your own mental and physical health not only makes you a good model for your child, but it makes you prepared to do the parenting that is necessary.
And you say that, and it carries me back to you talking about the fine motor skills and there being possibly an issue. And I can see a ripple effect. Okay, well, I don't want to write this essay. So let me just mash up the dolly house. I create a scene. I prefer you shout at me than tell me that my essay is less than. So there's this kind of coping mechanism. So I really appreciate what it is you're saying like that. And I want to thank you for the time that you've taken with us, Ms. Roberts, Patricia Roberts, Clinical Psychologist, Lead, Developmental Assessment Intervention Unit, Ministry of Education. And on behalf of the entire TTT team, this has been In Depth with me, Dike Rosta. Thank you for joining us.